Okay. I'm Nathan Smith.
Kristen Abhalter Smith.
I'm Abhalter Smith too. And we run Rome and Susan in Rogers Park in Chicago. And we've been doing that since Kristen started the space in 2012. It is named after Kristen's grandparents, whose first names are Roman and Susan. And for the last 6 weeks or so, we've been doing this experiment of doing artist talks with people who have had exhibitions at our storefront in the past, and sort of doing a reverse of maybe a traditional artist talk where you're talking about something that's right in front of you right then. It's more looking back and seeing what happened from then. And so we're really grateful that Maddie Reyna is with us tonight to do a version of that from their exhibition in 2015. I'm gonna throw some stuff in the chat, maybe. There's a link to pictures and stuff, so Maddie will also be showing us images in a minute. So we've been doing these talks every week. We're gonna take a little bit of a break, but we're gonna do more in the spring as well, and those are listed up in the chat right now. After Maddie's presentation, we are gonna have a Q&A, and if you're comfortable with it, you can just jump in, unmute yourself, start talking. Or if you want, you can throw questions in the chat and Kristen or I will personify them for you to Maddie and see what happens.
Yeah.
We have anything else to say?
I don't know. I think we're excited and honored to have you here, and it'll be cool to hear about your impressions of that time, and also I guess catch up with you and see what you're doing these days. And yeah, and in the spirit of conversation, everybody, welcome. Let us know when you want to say something and just jump in. So
yeah, so
casual Zoom.
With that, we'll hand the screen to Maddie.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. And good to see some friends in the Zoom. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about the show and to look back on it. I mean, I had just graduated grad school in 2014, the year before, and sort of applying to tons of things. I was like, I have to keep this momentum going. And I was really excited to work with Nathan and Kristen in Rogers Park and propose this show, which, looking back on it now, I was just chatting with them about this, but like looking back on it now, there's all of these ideas that I wanted to insert into the show that I kind of think now are a little superfluous. And that is really fun for me to be able to have the opportunity to do these talks and to see these things and to kind of pinpoint actually what the kernel of maybe my work is about over many years. So I'm going to share my screen and get into some of these images. That's not what I want to do. Okay. Yeah, so this is an exterior view of my show, Song of the Summer, at Rome and Susan. And I mean, it might sound a little corny, but I was like intentional, and I continue to be intentional about wanting to have summer shows. I think that they just have this sort of fun, less intense, like less serious vibe about them, which is something that I want my work to have as well. So I named it Song of the Summer because we were sort of entering this phase in Chicago, and I thought my work sort of encapsulated that sunny kind of that sunny energy. That's the poster there on the right for the show, which is just sort of like a desktop background that I found on the internet. This is a installation view of the show, and I talk about in the press release, and the show I think really comes from this one main memory that I have, or sort of childhood obsession that I had, that I never really expressed or talked about, but was just sort of this image of my mind that I lived in the mall. I was obsessed with the mall when I was a little kid, specifically the Sanrio store in the mall. I imagined that these sort of large drawers that you pull out that would have like the extra inventory in them. I would imagine like one of those is my bed, and at night like people would still be walking by, and I was really just like in love with this idea of living in a commercial space. And sometimes now I think about that as like the screen, or kind of I have a contemporary obsession with YouTubers and like thinking about that as a life that someone could live. And I think I've always sort of been drawn to this semi-public persona. Anyway, that's one part of it, but the other aspect is really just like developing a love for super poppy.
Oh, Maddie, you went choppy. You might have to turn your video off.
Turn my video off?
Maybe.
Okay. Ugh. Let me see. I'm gonna. Wait. Okay. Let's see if that is that. Can you hear? Is my voice steady?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm just sort of working within this sensibility of being in love with these kind of poppy adolescent style imagery. And I think at the time, let me go forward one. Yeah. So at the time I was sort of inserting this language on top of this work that had to do with teenage shoplifting and a sort of capitalist critique. And I think that those things were interesting for me to think about. But looking at this work now, I actually think that is not what this is about. And I actually am trying to protect myself from these kinds of narratives, hanging these narratives over my work now and going forward, because I think really what the kernel of this work and really, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be so bold to make this claim, but I might be, what all artwork is about is the individual artist's sensibilities and how they please those sensibilities and where they come from. So where does my taste come from? And I think really at the core, I am trying to probe my own sensibilities by identifying objects and imagery that sort of rattle this animal need that I have, or sort of like fit into this perfect box of, I think this is beautiful, I think this is provocative, I think this is exciting, and I want this imagery to belong to me. I want it to be part of something that I made. So this is a foam core cutout of this erection, ghost sort of imagery with these phone cases inserted into them. And yeah, it's just sort of this juxtaposition of things that were, made in a, commercially made versus made by hand by me. And then the sort of other little sort of childhood angle of this is my very young obsession with the movie Beetlejuice, which came out when I was 1 year old. And according to people in my family and really to their kind of like dismay, I was obsessed with this movie when I was a toddler and a baby, and I wanted it on every single day. And some of the imagery from this movie is sort of like embedded in my brain as something that, it just sort of, yeah, again, like satisfies these sort of taste buttons. And one of them, and a lot of this imagery, this sort of ghost imagery, comes from this movie of the two characters, the Alec Baldwin and the Gina Davis character, who are covered in their sheets there. So that's the sort of repetition, this couple under the sheet and being present throughout the show. And on the right there is a piece, another foam core piece. There's strawberries, there's another phone case, and the chain coming off the back was me really thinking about these pieces being potentially wearable, being jewelry, I think that has something to do with the phone case as well. I really liked the idea that the phone case was, in this case, jewelry for the phone, and embellishing things that had this sort of like functional, this function to them. And this is sort of a little behind the scenes of during install, alternative possibilities for the show. I really love the architecture and these weird panels in Roman Susan. That was actually sort of when I went to their website and saw these panels, I was like, I have to do something in that space. I really love that kind of quirky, these angular zones. And, you know, I was thinking about making this super long sideways erection thing that like went all the way across the entire gallery. And then there's some other paintings on the right there, which I wish I still had. Who knows where they are? But those are some alternatives. And then at this time in 2015, I would, you know, treasure hunting is a big part of my work.
You froze up a minute again, Maddie.
Really, things that should I try?
I don't know. Maybe just
start
just so
again
you know.
at treasure hunting.
Yeah.
Okay, treasure hunting. I'm sorry, guys. So yeah, treasure hunting has always been a part of my work. And here in 2015, I was using it very literally. Things that I just wanted from Forever 21 or found at the thrift store, instead of using them on my nails as nail polish, I was putting them into paintings because I felt like the same mechanism was happening when I saw them in the store as maybe was when I was creating a painting, when I was trying to make this sort of perfect, satisfying, pleasurable image. That sort of feeling is happening at the store as well. And I felt like this work was sort of fitting into this, this commercial space, utilizing that window at Roman Susan, and that's why some of them showed up there. And so the document on the right is from a little bit earlier than my show at Roman Susan. It's a document that I created while I was in grad school, but it really began, I mean, it's probably one of the most important things I made while I was in grad school. At the time I was working for Contemporary Art Daily, which, you know, my job was looking at documentation and reviewing press releases and trying to decide whether or not the art was like interesting. And I developed this little code of conduct for my studio based on the feeling that I had about the work that was successful or considered important. So I'm against the aesthetic of intelligence. I continue to this day to be weary of the aesthetic of intelligence, which really is exemplified by large scale, sort of casual, lazy, abstract paintings, representations of achievement. This has to do with paintings that look intentionally labored over. You know, I can like these kinds of things, but I also am taking a position against them. It's a complicated relationship. And then the conventions of presentation, this has to do with how you build an exhibition, making sure that the paintings are legible and how I might go against that. And again, legible documentation, expanding it into the documentation. Often I am not supportive of my work being documented well. That's not something that I personally am interested in. In fact, a lot of times I will sort of turn the documentation into its own object, its own artwork. And there are multiple ways that I've engaged with that you know, over the past few years. But I thought this little strawberry piece, like kind of above the radiator, exemplified a lot of these things that I'm talking about, sort of made flippantly, but powerful emotionally to me in my studio. It's a small thing that's hung in a weird zone. And, you know, it kind of was working, and I think that's why it made it into the show. So one of the really exciting things that happened right after this show is I met another Rogers Park rock star, Dan Miller, who is doing this project with Thomas Kong. For those of you who haven't been to Kim's Corner Food, you should definitely go. Thomas Kong is an amazing artist who's working there out of his store. And Dan invited me to sort of select some of Thomas's work and hang it in the back room. And the picture on the right was taken by me, and I was very inspired by his workspace. And my strategy for working in this space was really to kind of pare down everything that was going on. When you go into the store, you can see hundreds of versions of Thomas's work, but I really wanted to try and pinpoint the ones that did this kind of singing that I'm looking for when I'm working in my studio, making my own work, and sort of looking at his work through that same lens. So I picked, what is there, maybe 5, 6, 7 paintings there that I thought really stood out to me. I thought this was an interesting way to look at it, rather than just sort of this like overwhelming, because there's hundreds of paintings in there that are amazing, or collages in there that are amazing. But that was a really fun experience that directly came out of my show at Rome and Susan, and meeting your community there at the opening. Lots of people know this, I guess, but I was involved with Julius Caesar as a co-director, and the which is this kind of, should I?
Yeah, we lost you at the start of Julius Caesar.
Okay. Let me try to switch my Wi-Fi again.
Kate, are you still Julius Caesar?
I am, yes.
Cool.
Everyone looks so young. Oh my God.
Okay, I'm switched, so let's see if that makes a difference. Sorry about this, guys. Yeah, so on the following summer, I had a solo show at Julius Caesar. On the right there is the documentation kind of the poster for that show. I really get into building the posters as well, and how the show will be teased. I'm not someone who likes to post documentation of the show before it happens. I like to really sort of set up the anticipation for what you're walking into. And this is some of the documentation from the show, which again, I'm sort of engaging with this kind of like making it difficult to look at the work. There's paintings, there's posters. The promo show is part of the show. I feel like I'm trying to cross these boundaries between what is acceptable. I'm just sort of claiming that it's all acceptable. And, on the right, there is the text that I wrote to go along with the show, or it's documentation of a conversation that I had with a director at a gallery in Texas. And I was sort of asking them about their demographics and lack of showing women. And, I think about this now, and it was a really interesting conversation for me to have, because I was having these kinds of conversations at work. Should we admonish or somehow get involved with curating that's not involving women? And so this was on my mind a lot in terms of making my own work and thinking about who I was as an artist. And I think that it is important to this show, but I think that that's not what this work is about. I think that, again, this work is about me trying to pinpoint these sort of areas where my sensibilities and my tastes are really tuned up to 10. And for whatever reason, for intuitive reasons, for formal reasons, these posters and these paintings represent my life at that moment, and were chosen to be in the show. And I sort of pivoted out of Julius Caesar into working on a project in my own home called Dreamboat, which is an exhibition space that was dedicated to the artists that I love the most. Again, at this time, I'm reading press releases constantly. I'm reading about gallerists saying why they put certain shows together. And I know the reason they put it together. It's because they're friends with that person. It's because they want to try to get something from that person. There's all these sort of interpersonal relationships that are not commented on in the professional scene that I just felt like needed to be addressed. So I was saying bluntly, I'm representing these 5 people who are my best friends, who I spend the most time with, and there is, to me, like this sort of impossible bridge between people who I love as people and I love as artists, and it's very difficult for me to be BFFs with someone whose work, just like doesn't do it for me. So that was the sort of idea for this whole curatorial project, which maybe lasted 18 months. There's some documentation from the shows, Chris Edwards' show and then Jacob's show, which his first show happened in New York. I moved to New York in 2016. And also in 2016, I went on residency in Iceland and mostly worked on a screenplay, which still exists really only in PDF form, based on a story that my mom wrote. So my mom wrote a story when she was a teen about this sort of group of women who get admitted, group of girls that get admitted to the first college on the moon. They are like traveling to the moon, and then the doors open and all of these girls
You were traveling to the moon, Maddie, and then it got broken by the internet again.
Well, that's appropriate because they're traveling and then the doors open and all these girls are killed. That's sort of the end of this story that my mom wrote when she was 13. I was kind of obsessed with this as it gave me a window into my mom of someone who I didn't think was capable of writing something like that. So I tried to adapt it to my own life at that time, being sort of traveling wanderer, feminist, and how there were these sort of like lurking ideas in her mind and how that sort of influenced me as an adolescent girl as well. So these were posters that I made for the movie that will probably never be made. Around the same time, I got an IUD, which is like, this sort of birth control device. And one of the, the side effects of having this thing in my body was that I was having really intense hallucinogenic dreams, like all night long. I would go to sleep and felt like I wasn't asleep. And I started recording these dreams. I started like voice recording them. And this was just images of a show that I had at 1-800-BAD-DRUG, which is ran by Leander Capuzzo in New York. But I had these sort of like little speakers in the walls that I was dictating these whispered stories that I had in my dreams. These daisy worlds were inspired by a story about, one of the possible mutations that could happen on Earth for future global warming is that all the vegetation will turn white to reflect the sun. I'm talking about these stories and I realize I'm contradicting myself a little bit because I've been saying like the narrative isn't important, but it is and it isn't. And I think that a lot of times I'm just seeing trends present in these ideas that maybe are just that they're sort of trendy and not really like what the kernel is. And I'm working through that. I hosted an art review radio show for, 9-10 months in New York. We would go look at shows and with a group of friends and just talk about them, review them in the same day. So this would be like a long 9-hour process. And I think that this really just speaks to my interest in talking about art and how that helps me sort of move through my own studio practice. I think I work best in my own studio when I am taking in a lot of art and formulating a lot of opinions. It was on KPIS FM, so that's why that image is there. This is maybe a little bit of a weird one, but a mega creative inspiration maybe from 2016 to last year was the presence of this online show called Blood Feast. And it was a live show that happened every night. And you could call in, you could perform. You could send them imagery, and I participated in this show every night for almost 5 years, and sort of created characters, and we wrote songs together, and wrote jokes, and I started making sort of fan art for them, scenes set, like backdrops for them, for my own performances that I would Skype in with. And I think really what this has more to do with is like my acceptance of fan art into, you know, whatever, like a fine art scenario, fine art setting. This is a image of my studio in Brooklyn on the left there, and then some of the sort of prop paintings I would make that, you know, I still, you know, whatever, I would show that as like and I did show that as just like a regular painting. I was making quick drawings based on watching the show of the different characters doing things. On the right there is like an outfit. These are like on big bag dresses that I made. And that's why my Instagram handle is Rat Hands. That's where it comes from. It comes from that world. It comes from that community. I think a lot of times maybe the art community is, or at least my family is like, what's up with that? And I mean, it's just, it has to exist that way because that's that personality. And really, okay, where did I get cut off?
You're talking about personality.
Oh, I guess that show just had a huge influence on my sort of creative output for a few years, and I was taking imagery from that show and putting them into my painting. So this sort of A-B model here on this painting comes from a puzzle that we would solve together as a community on that show. And this again comes back to this idea of treasure hunting, me seeing imagery and downloading them and reusing them in my paintings. I've been making, and I still make a lot of paintings that sort of have this exact setup with this sort of grid in the background and different things sort of bubbled out. And I think of these as like sort of looking down on a tabletop of treasures. Whether they're actual objects or just 2D images is irrelevant, I guess. This was a show that I had, I don't know, 2018, 2019, I'm not very good at that, but another show at Julius Caesar. These are foam core treasures. These are treasures, these are images that I found, you know, either walking down the street or on Instagram that I would save and want to turn them into my own objects. I wanted to have them. I wanted them to be mine. So I work with foam core because it's so forgiving. I mean, it's not great to ship, to be honest. Like a lot of times it can crack. But for me, I can make the exact shape that I want with an X-Acto knife. I can carry, you know, a 4-foot stack of them and it weighs like a pound. It's just very easy for me to work with this material. And even when I do venture into wood or something like that, I always just come back to what's easy and work with foam core. And so these are just like beautiful little tokens that were in my life. You know, this cabinet on the right, this sort of small blue cabinet is like this cabinet that was in a restaurant that I worked at that I just absolutely loved. Like I have a relationship with that piece of furniture, and like here it is, I wanted to have it forever. And just some cute little animals, always. And I guess I'll talk about like the little bit of a pivot that I've been having maybe in the past few months, working with flowers. So this is my studio last year, and I think the flower arranging really just, it honestly came from getting married and needing to save money and do it myself. But I realized when I was arranging flowers that I was operating or using a lot of the same areas of my brain that I do when I'm making a painting. I'm thinking about form, thinking about figure, I'm thinking about color and composition. And a lot of times if I'm stuck or self-conscious about a painting, I'll work with flowers, and that really helps to free me up. I feel like they're, everybody loves a flower arrangement kind of regardless of what it looks like. And that gives me a lot of freedom that sort of removes the audience when I'm working in my studio. So my studio now really is split between painting and working with flowers and making these sort of living sculptures. And I've been excited to host a handful of workshops about this idea, and painters really love flower arranging. So if you're a painter and you're not doing it, I highly recommend going to Trader Joe's and spending 20 bucks and having some fun. And then I'll end here about Slung Leg. So Jake and I bought this building in August. It's 130 years old. It's in Little Village on California and Cermak. It is a total mess and is currently being renovated by some wild and wacky guys, but we will be opening a space, or we had a sort of soft opening recently, but we have a little 200 square foot storefront there, and we will be opening a space in Slung Leg, sort of in Maddie fashion. This term has to do with intimacy. So in art historical paintings, in old sort of Bernini era sculptures, this image of the slung leg, the leg over another leg, connotates lovers or connotates intimacy or a close relationship. And that's how I like to look at curating. That's how I like to look at working, I guess, with my husband to curate shows. So it sort of has this
it has this
yeah, I just like to have a theme when I'm sort of running a show or running a space, or rather than just sort of like here's some people, I guess. But that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take some questions or hear from you guys what you think.
That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. As you were talking through things, I realized like I thought about things before this evening, and sort of like, I was always interested in Dreamboat and sort of like owning the personal relationships that you have in those. And it was always really interesting to me because we did not know you before you sent us a proposal.
Yeah.
And so we're like operating the opposite way. And many of the wonderful people we've met over the recent past are that way, where we don't know them beforehand. So it's sort of like the opposite of what you are there. But as you were talking, I realized that you told us about this residency in Iceland, which Kristen then went to, and I have also then gone to Iceland because it's awesome. And you also told us like, becoming a nonprofit is super easy. Julius Caesar's doing it. You guys can do it really easily. And so we've done that, and now we are like in deep. Like, I know how spreadsheets work now. It's horrifying. But anyways, I was just wondering if you'd talk more about showing work in your own home and just owning the relationships of the people you
yeah,
love.
I mean, I think that it comes from a couple of things. It comes from wanting to critique the commercial New York art world that is doing one thing but writing a press release about something else. And I don't really think Chicago falls into that too much. I think Chicago kind of like celebrates these things, and that's why Dreamboat could exist or even be like, something that didn't completely piss people off. But yeah, I think what you guys are up to is sort of maybe, not part of the thing that I was looking at. Cause again, I'm like, just like in press release world, feeling like people are making disingenuous decisions about curation. And yeah, I mean, meeting new people is a really good thing too.
Yeah. I'm curious because I don't think what we do is curating at all, right? Like, you installed that show 2 or 3 ways. We never saw it. We let you do what you wanted to do, and that's sort of how we do it usually. Yeah. When you are installing with someone you have a close relationship with in your own home, have you been like, no, this is no good, we've got to like switch it up? like how firm of a hand of a curator are you?
No, I think the furthest it's ever gone is just being like, encouraging certain moods or tones within a show. I don't feel like I want to nitpick what's happening on the walls or say, do this painting and not that painting. And a lot of times, and this was how I felt at Julius Caesar, like we should just give the people the space and let them do what they want. But I can remember times in Dreamboat and even conversations we're having right now with Slung Leg, like I want to, I think there's room to have conversations about what Chicago should be seeing, I guess. Like that's really the conversation that I'm having right now and where that comes from. It's like, okay, well, people are not familiar with your work, so let's like show them the thing that, is like the A team. Let's get some of that in there. And I think that would probably be like the closest I've gotten to being a curatorial dictator.
Sounds good. Anyone else, please feel free to unmute and get in on this.
I was just looking at documentation at your show at Roman Susan, and there's that piece that's in the front window that has like some logos on it, and then also says like Dreamboat above it. Is that like the source for the project? Where did that come from?
Well, the Glicka is like a Japanese, I don't know, candy brand or something. And I do think that Dreamboat was directly inspired by that logo. But yeah, I think, it's possible that okay,
you're at it's possible that.
Yeah. It's possible.
Yeah.
I think Dreamboat probably did not exist at the time that I made that piece, or like wasn't announced or wasn't fully fleshed out. And that is also just kind of a way that I work. Like I've had the term slung leg as like a thing that I'm interested in, a concept that I'm interested in, like probably in my mind for 2 or 3 years. Like these are just sort of concepts that are also floating in the ether of all of these sort of objects and images that I'm collecting. And yeah, I mean, the font, the whole brand is to me, like a part of the project itself. Like the way it's presented was important for Dreamboat for sure.
I love how you're talking about the just like seeing something at the store and liking it so much that you like want to put it into a painting and want to preserve it in a way that like you get just excited about seeing something and buying it. It's almost like you're preserving that like shopping high that comes when you like actually like give money to someone for an object. And I just like have like to this day that strong memory of going to a Sanrio store and just being like feeling so like such that like youthful excitement about being like, this is gonna like be my identity, like this will like form me if I own this object. So I love that aspect of those works.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think in the past that I've talked about these being my points of inspiration, and my work has been called vapid for that. And sometimes like I understand why someone might say that, but I also think that there's an honesty there. Like I'm not doing it, I'm actually trying to probe like the most honest like imagery that I can own and say that I love. And if somebody else thinks of it that way, then so be it. Let's fight about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't quite know how to ask my question. It's sort of like I'm imagining trying to write an artist talk and think back 5 or 6 years worth of production. Do you have a sense of what the arc has been? Or you've tried to talk about through lines a little bit, but I'm just really curious, and especially sort of against the fact that the Trump administration and I feel like there's a certain amount of things that got clarified in that time, like what's at stake, and both that and the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, like there's just a, I don't know, been a sense of like things, having to figure out what things matter and what things don't. And obviously you've been doing that in your practice anyway, but I'm just sort of curious, like the whole arc of it since 2015, what you see as changing.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot has changed, to be honest, but I think what I would say is sort of, I'm trying to pinpoint, okay, so a lot of times I think artists who are sort of have these grand narratives on their work, ultimately it really is about the way that it looks, or otherwise it wouldn't look that way. And again, this is something that's maybe similar to working with your friends, or talking about the relationships that you have with the people that you're curating. I want to be honest about that. I would love it if other artists were honest about that. I understand that it's sort of like a dead end conversation to say like, this is just the thing that I wanted to look at. This is the thing that, I had to make it this way. But I think that a lot of times we're ignoring or sort of not valuing that as a thing. And what do I learn about myself, like in a Freudian way? What do I learn about myself if I really try to pinpoint these totems and these symbols that I've carried throughout my life? And by probing that, can I get at something about myself that I think actually looking back over these years, it starts to happen. But no, I mean, I really don't know yet. I really don't know yet.
Can you say what the concept for Slung Leg is, like what the exhibition concept is?
I mean, it might be a little bit of Dreamboat too. I heard all of your questions.
Yeah, you just
I heard
Dreamboat too.
Yeah, Dreamboat 2 is
yeah. Yeah, I think that that's still interesting to me. I think the idea of working with your friends and being upfront about that. That's kind of what the radio show was about. It was about friends from grad school coming together, and this, that like every day during grad school you sit down and you talk about the paintings that you saw that day or whatever, and that was like such a generative time for me that I wanted some of that back in my life. So I think in terms of curation, like, yeah, it will be aimed at being honest about relationships and some of these other sort of even sort of outsidery kind of things that I'm interested in. There's a man who I really want to work with, named Joe Gagliano, who has a storefront in Ridgewood. It says like, I don't know if I've talked to you about this guy yet before, Kate, but it says like New Gear at the top. He like hand painted it. No. He sits in front of his store, and he makes exclusively like Sharpie drawings of Jesus like in strip clubs. That's kind of like all he does.
Okay.
And I became really just kind of like obsessed with this guy who, again, is just kind of like, this is just what I do. I mean, like, I'm not trying to have this like highfalutin conversation about it. And I want to sort of bring some of that into my space. So that's kind of
I'm excited to see that show at Slung Leg.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to call him and email him like 50 times, and he's just on another world. But I'm just gonna have to go to Ridgewood probably and walk by his house.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of the plan.
I really like the joy and the honesty that you talk about in your work. And I remember talking a lot about the shoplifting and the phone cases and like being confused by that combination with like the dildo shape. but I also think that it was like what really kind of like came everything, or like whatever, what really sort of like solidified it was your use of the line around the space And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your idea about sort of like the spacing of how you hung things in the gallery.
Yeah, I do remember now that you said that I sort of hung them all at that, like the bottoms all hit the same line, which I think had to do with the sort of natural bank that's there in front of the window, and just feeling like that was a semi-awkward decision to make, and it really like checked that list that I made for myself of like I can't remember, it's like
Conventions of
conventions of,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like, how can I be unconventional and make this decision? And maybe I think it was just like as simple as that.
Well, it was sort of like conventional and unconventional, because it's sort of like you can't, like you kind of have no choice in a way but to be unconventional in the space. But like that
Definitely.
decision was just like really like obvious because of all the levels. And it was just sort of like, why is this thing like at my knee level? But then you just like realize that, then you're like, oh yeah, because if I go down the steps, then it's going to be like at my chest level or whatever.
Yeah, there was that one painting that's like behind the railing a little bit, because that's just where, if it was following the rule, that's where it had to be hung. Yeah, I think I was, similar to dropping the ceiling in Julius Caesar, like it's sort of the same, has that same function of complicating the viewer's relationship with what they're looking at, and sort of making the viewing experience slightly awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, so when we were doing these talks, we're like looking back at whatever documentation we have, and looking back at it, it was just like, our space has never looked weirder than this situation where you're like applying these conventional rules of giving everything equal space and hanging them on a line. And it was just, yeah, I don't know, in the rear view mirror, it's just like, somehow by doing the simplest version of this, you heighten how weird the room is so much. And I don't know, I don't really have a question, but
The
just
room is weird.
that. Yeah.
But I feel like it really just adds to the work, because it's like this whole other level of forced experience that, I don't know, that's sort of like simulating that idea of what you're saying about the presentation, or like going and being obsessed with the shelving and like the drawers at the store, and this sort of like extra design that's put into how these objects are kept in their like original form. And then just sort of like thinking about how the gallery keeps things, or how, it's just like a whole environmental aspect.
Yeah, I really appreciate like non-white cube galleries, I think. And I think that decision of the way those paintings were hung had to do with what Rome and Susan was, the way that it looked, the architecture of it, and how I couldn't sort of just like classically hang things. Or I think that's why in those photos of alternative, the alternative shows, you're like seeing things up high and like wrapping around. I think that, I was trying to, I don't know, make things gel, I guess. And it's a weird space to try to do that.
I kind of miss the giant thing.
I know. I was like, wow, that looks good. What happened to that? Today, it's like, what happened?
So for you, does that kind of spatial awareness, or I forget what the phrase was, like complicating the viewing experience, especially like the drop ceiling at Julius Caesar, does that fall into your bucket of like just aesthetic things that you like, or is that more about a kind of belief that you have about the way art experiences should function? And I'm also in the back of my head thinking about the television show, which I think I saw a few times, but was just so confused.
No way.
Because it's such a strange television format. Like it's not a conventional television format in the way that a foam core drop ceiling is not a traditional exhibition format. So I guess I'm wondering if about format choices, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a part of the 2015, 2016 me that was like just kind of sick of conventions. And maybe it's still there, and I am, my work, yes, there is this element of like, you know, talking about my sensibility and trying to pinpoint that, and trying to honor that and be honest about that within the paintings. But then there is this other, that in itself, I think, is a critique of the contemporary art world, or the way that I see it. Being honest about that and being straight up about that, I think that that can be a form of critique. But I also think that, yes, these like formats, the conventions of exhibition, the way that I want to, I don't know, like, yeah, complicate those, make those difficult, call attention to those things, that's another form of critique that, you know, maybe that's sort of like the through line, that there's always going to be my interest in kind of being a little bit of a punk about it. Yeah, I guess. Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just got a quick question. But I was also going to say, I was fascinated by the way you sort of talk about these artist spaces and how you took these different avenues and then took you to where you're at now. Something I'm investigating. I'm new to Chicago, so just sort of investigating these art spaces. First year grad at SAIC. But I was also wondering how you talked about that exhibition in Texas and how you sent those emails. And you're totally on point. You know, we have so many, coming from Dallas, and we have so many discrepancies, and we don't really have artist-run spaces like Chicago does. I'm just curious about how that exhibition got on your radar, what inspired you to reach out to them, and just sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, part of my job was part.
We lost you again.
Okay, sorry, I'm back. Thanks for your question, Hugo. Yeah, part of my job was collecting demographic information for galleries that were featured in this database of venues that I managed. So I was actually sort of doing research on how often galleries were showing men versus women. And this gallery, the Power Station in Dallas, had the worst demographics of all the spaces that I looked at. I mean, there were probably 800 or so in this database. And you know, I wrote to them with a very sort of friendly tone. Even I concealed my name and sort of picked like a non-male, like a name that you couldn't tell if it was male or female. My name is Casey in the email. So I'm trying to like approach it and say, I'm starting my own space, and I see these like demographic problems as like an inevitability of running a space because so many spaces are doing this. Can you talk to me about how you make these decisions? And I don't know, I was just interested in having a diplomatic conversation with someone about these demographics. And they wrote me back and they were like, you know, this really has to do with the fact that we're in Texas and we're working with artists in Berlin and New York, and we invite people and they don't come, or schedules are really complicated. And I think I was like, I don't know, I think there were times that I was salty about this answer. I felt like that wasn't good enough of an answer. And then I started Dreamboat, and part of the other thing with Dreamboat was that I was going to have 50% men and 50% women. And every single woman that I invited like said no. My best friends, my best female friends, like they said no. And I was like bending over backwards to try to make this happen. So, you know, I that was a little bit of a pill to swallow, right? Like sometimes people are trying to do these things, and I'm trying to do these things and they don't work. It doesn't work out the way that you think it will. So, you know, this was just that part of that show, that sort of text involved in that show was really just a token of things that I was thinking about. But I really don't feel like I was trying to make too much of a I don't know, maybe I was. I mean, I wasn't trying to like get them shut down, or I wasn't trying to cancel them or something. You know, I was more just kind of like, what's going on with this? How does this happen? Will someone have a conversation with me about it? And they did. But I think Chicago, like part of the reason I was excited to move back to Chicago last year is because of the DIY art scene here. So I think that it's very exciting. There's lots of people with tons of ideas, and it's affordable to just do that. And there's enough of a community that you can do it. Maybe sort of different than Texas. I haven't been in Texas in a long time, and I'm not sure what the art scene is like.
Yes, yeah, very different from Chicago. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the scale of the pieces you make, because it kind of seems like they're like in this sort of like handheld scale, or like there's like this sort of like relationship to the body. And I'm just wondering about that, and also about maybe like, do you sort of like make them one idea at a time, or do they sort of like develop all at once?
Well, my process involves enamel painting giant boards of foam core all at the same time, because I don't want that enamel out more than it needs to be. I have hundreds of enamel boards that I made like maybe 2 years ago. But then what I'll do is I'll just like get inspired to make a shape and cut that out of whatever color board it needs to have happen. And a lot of times, yeah, I think that the scale of them does have to do with feeling like they're precious and holdable and toys. And that's sort of as close as I can get to. But then sometimes I do make big things, so I don't really know. But yes, a lot of times it has to do with that like sort of precious feeling.
And then you cut them out.
Yeah, usually I draw. Sorry.
I think you were saying usually draw.
Yeah.
Yes, I usually draw on the back. So all of those foam core paintings will have like actually a pretty good drawing on the, my husband is like, you should show the back of those. Like, so they have a drawing on the back, and then I cut it out and paint it on the other side.
One of the things, like looking at your presentation, that it reminded me of that show is that you were sort of, when you're talking about taking ownership of the image, which also bleeds into brands, and then these sort of like, you have all these foam sort of like jeweled cases that seem very manufactured. When I was sitting there with this show, when it was open, I realized that all of the phone covers didn't match each other, but it was really subtle. So like someone is making them by hand somewhere, but they're generally, you would never see the same phone cover beside each other or whatever. And you have like 10 in a row, and it's just like, oh, these are not like as industrially manufactured as I think they are. And there's a lot of people's hand in this stuff, and they're not perfect, and they're weird in this particular way that also maybe your cutout silhouettes have some of that property too. And so it just reminded me of that. I don't know, I don't have a specific question, but if you have anything you want to riff off of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is weird to see that same product over and over again, because normally you just buy the one, and I was interested in that, how they could be subtly different. And I will often make, maybe the best example of this in this presentation was the sort of most recent show at Julius Caesar with the small guys. Like I will often make multiples of the same painting sort of with that idea, trying to copy myself, trying to be like a little bit of a machine about it, and it never works. You know, they're always slightly different, and yeah, I think that there is a convention being twisted there, or otherwise I probably wouldn't do it. But yeah. You guys have had such great questions, and I really am humbled that you wanted to hear me talk about my work. So thank you so much for coming and for your questions. It has been very, like, kind of as I said in the beginning, it's been very helpful for me to look back at these things, and motivating for me to look back at this work and talk about it with people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you.
really awesome.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us as well.
Hope to see you all in person soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Come check out Slung Leg.
Yeah, come on down. Please do.
Cool.
Very good.
All
Have a good
right, everybody.
Have
Good
a
night.
great night.